Okay, let's get started. Welcome back. This is episode 7 of the Think Travel Payments webinar series. My name is Paul van Alphen, and today's episode is about fraud and credit risk management. And it's an honor to have two guests from the industry with me today. And let's start with a round of introductions. So Peny, welcome.
Hello all, nice to see you again. I am Peny Rizou. I'm the Chief Fintech Officer of eTravel Group and also heading EG Fintech Solutions, which is the fintech leg of eTravel Group, being now a more B2B focused travel stakeholder. And today I'm going to talk with you around the fraud topics.
Okay, and maybe for those people that don't know eTravel, because it's not a consumer-facing brand, right? So maybe a bit of background about the company.
Yes, that is a good point. So ETG has been traditionally a consumer-facing brand, right? With brands like GoToGate, MyTrip.com, and we have been one of the largest, and we are one of the largest OTAs across the globe, with presence in more than 75 countries and a process of a billion of euros. And at some point, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, we have transitioned being a more B2B focused travel flight content, not travel flight content provider. And since then, we have been having great customers like Booking.com in our ecosystem, and we have been mainly driving growth through developing our core product, which is flights, and be able to offer it into other OTAs or B2B players in the market. And this is how the fintech division, the fintech initiative came, was born. With Precision, the fraud prevention solution we are having available in the market, being one of the first products. And now we are just focusing on driving growth and value for our B2B customers in the industry.
Great. Thanks for clarifying that. Next up, Livia. Livia, great that you can join us. Maybe a bit of background on yourself, but also on X3.aero.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paul. So Livia Vité, I'm the CEO for Actuary.aero. For those of you that don't know what we do and who we are a fintech that helps our customers leverage risk to basically grow revenue and unlock cash flow. So our customers tend to be acquirers, and they're usually interested, and the types of merchants that are interested in us are what we call deferred delivery merchants, which like travel, where the customer has made a payment upfront and the service or the good is delivered sometime later. So we work with acquirers, issuers, schemes, and in terms of travel, airlines, tour operators, OTAs, hotels, cruise. So all those kinds of things. So
okay, thank you. And whereby Peny will cover the fraud risk side, you will cover the credit risk side, and you will meet in the middle. We'll see that in a bit. Let's get going. Before we do that, a bit of housekeeping. We're on Zoom, so there is a Q&A box, and James. He's not my butler, but no, he will keep an eye on the Q&A section as well, and he will come back at the end as well to share any questions that have come in. As with the previous ones, this one will also be recorded and will be available both on the Finmont YouTube channel and also on the Up in the Air YouTube channel. And there's also a dedicated page which you can follow, where also the next sessions will be announced, but also the deck for this session will be shared, and also the recording will be announced. As I said, so this is a series. We've had 6 so far. Previous one was with hotel payment ecosystem with James and with Anna. And today's is fraud and credit risk management. And so we have one pending for later this spring on B2B payments, still to be scheduled, but we'll let you know about that. The recordings again can be found on the YouTube channel if you want to go back to these sessions as well. So for today, two very important aspects of dealing with payments in the travel sector, fraud and credit risk. And we'll start off with some background on fraud in travel with Peny. What does a holistic approach, what does an end-to-end system covering fraud risk look like? And what are the different factors that play a role, different components? What kind of modules are in there? What kind of technologies? It's very complex. We'll see that in a bit. We'll also stop by dispute management. What happens if fraud is not detected up front, but results in a reverse transaction, in a chargeback? How do you deal with that? And then we'll switch over to credit risk with Livia, and especially, what can you do to restore trust? To keep on assessing, what the likelihood is that this event will happen, and how can you best make it transparent and monitor it? And we'll end up with some interesting latest industry news. Okay, so a bit of background. I've been involved in travel payments, airline payments, and OTA payments for the last 20 years, and fraud's always been on my radar as part of the end-to-end system, but I don't call myself an expert. That's why I brought Peny in to help me with that. But I think it's good that fraud has been around, and maybe we start at the time that the first OTAs became active in the late 90s, early 2000s, and also airlines started to sell online. All of a sudden, they became responsible for dealing with any fraudulent behavior by passengers, by people that try to book flights and basically use a stolen card, or in the end, end up defrauding the airline. And Peny, this may be a good moment to also hand it over to you. What I've put on the screen now is some of the historic cases where typically for a rules-based engine would look at the data that's provided with the transaction and see if there's any patterns there that might indicate a known fraudulent behavior. But there was maybe from the days that things were still relatively simple, right? I think things are bit more complicated nowadays, but maybe you can give some background on how you, as a global, tier one OTA, are dealing with fraud, and how you, how it has developed over the years.
First of all, travel is one of the most challenging industries in terms of fraud. I think that's not a secret. We all know. It is also known. I mean, this is public data and information. Not me saying that travel is. In 24, it would be more than 11 trillion. Then you have fraud cost accounting for 3% of the airline revenue. Again, this is reports demonstrating these figures. And then you also have a situation where the false positives, which false positives means when wrong decisions are being taken around fraud, they are between 3 and 10%, and in certain cases can go even further. So we have to deal with a really big problem in the travel industry. 46% of the fraud, this is the MRC report, saying 46% of fraud is coming from travel. So why is this happening? So first of all, the flight in the specific case product, which us as an OTA, our OTA brands have as a core product, is a commodity. It's a high value, and it's a transferable ticket. It's transferable, right? So you really, there is really a lot of value from fraudsters to be able and resell it and take advantage of it. And also it is delivered digitally. So there is not an easy way to ask for proofs and so on. So the only thing that you have in your hands in reality is a lot of parameters and elements, some of which we see in your slide, Paul, that actually draw a picture around what is the profile of this customer and what are the attributes of this customer. But then there is a lot of sophistication of how these attributes are being used by fraudsters in order to perform fraud. So the product itself, the flight product, for example, has some underlying characteristics like the passenger name, like the OND, which is the origin and the destination, like the booking window, how short or long the time frames are. And fraudsters that you cannot imagine how sophisticated they can be, especially in different territories, they take advantage of these characteristics and they create scenarios so that they can trick the fraud solutions that merchants have. Let me give you an example just to understand. In the travel, in the flight industry, right? The O&Ds, like depending on the O&D, some are classified as high risk, low risk, and so on. So one of the things that they do is that they book tickets with the fraudulent destination being a stopover, and you see the whole destination, you see the whole ticket. It's great. You go from Berlin to Istanbul, fantastic, you know. But then this ticket has a stopover in Cairo, which let's say that this is considered a risky destination, right? But can you really tell if this transaction is fraudulent or not just by this element? Definitely not, right? And this is where complexity triggers in, because you need to have technology, processes, knowledge, understanding, alerts to be able and reduce as much as possible the false positive, but also keep the fraud out. Another case would be the names, the data, the cardholder data, and the data of the reservation. And I'm not talking about compromised cardholder data. I'm not talking about impersonation or phishing or stealing the data. I'm talking about someone using a stolen card and then take the data, for example, from the card and pretend that this is the passenger by either creating a reservation for the passenger alone, and then after a few days he creates another reservation by the same passenger for another passenger. And this is how, I mean, this is their day job, right? They continuously try to understand and find the patterns, anti-patterns, like the machine learning models and the fraud prevention solutions trying to find patterns. They're trying to beat these patterns, right? So all those patterns, it's not only one solution or one way to tackle them, and it's not straightforward. In the past, it was more basic, the way we will be addressing that. Not anymore. And the most important thing when those patterns are being identified, it's not the pattern itself, it's the speed. It's how fast you get it, how fast you're able to say that is a fraudulent transaction and be accurate. So the level of accuracy, which is, for example, one of our KPIs, the level of accuracy on your decisions, either bad, like decline, or good, like accept, it is very important to be taken fast and being introduced into your processes and solutions. So, I mean, I see all this, data that you have here, like the input. I can tell you with confidence that there are another 200 of those, and all of them creating a matrix of things. So you can have, for example, an origin and destination alert, and at the same time, somebody is also manipulating the business class element, and then at the same time, somebody's impersonating or manipulating card data elements. So if fraudsters are combining in a very sophisticated and clever way and consistently, this is a very good way how to trick models and rules and whatever each merchant is using.
So basically, Penny, the number of permutations are endless, right? So I've also seen that where maybe in way back 10, 20 years ago, would still be okay to do it during office hours, but it's a 24/7, always on business nowadays, right? And not only from a day-to-day screening perspective, also from a learning perspective. We'll come back to that later as well. But like you said, there is constantly a chase, to keep up with these very creative and very, very heavily incentivized. Like you said, the risk of getting caught is very low, and the reward is very high, right? So there's a lot of incentive for people to try it out.
Exactly. And if you consider that some merchants have a local character, but some other merchants have global character, or products being sold globally. So maybe they are a local, they have a high level of locality, but their products, like their flights, for example, are being sold in with different destinations, and therefore they have incoming customers from different markets. So the market behavior is very, very relevant with fraud, patterns. You see very different behaviors depending on the locations. We all know LATAM is challenging. We all know US is challenging. Same goes for Africa. Same goes for certain countries in Asia. So you really need to be able to identify different patterns in different regions and localities, and 24/7, because by definition the time zones are different. So you might be seeing hittings in different time zones. That means you need to have a global serving solution with processes that they are set to serve globally, that kind of ecosystem. And that's what we had to do, right? Because otherwise we wouldn't be able to grow in 75 countries and claim a very good also market share on those markets, right? And then if you think about it, how important fraud prevention is if you go and expand in different territories, it is definitely a serious blocker, also from what we have heard from conversations that I have been having, for growth and for expansion. There are companies that they do not dare to go to markets that they are considered lucrative, but very challenging from the fraud perspective.
I must say, I've seen it happening the other way around as well, that companies went in only to find out that they were basically caught, by fraudsters because they were not protected yet as they should be, or not aware of the local conditions, etc. So it is. I mean, we're just scratching the surface here, and there's so much more detail. But let's move on. So let's then look at from a merchant perspective, how to get organized. Now, what are your challenges? We already touched on that. First of all, you have to have skilled, very clever, skilled people to run the operation. But it's also a challenge to keep on educating yourself. Having a community around you that you can also rely on to share information, for instance. And Livia, by the way, Axios Aero has a sister company called Perseus, and that's historically has been the community where fraud-related data was shared, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, as part of Perseus Group, Perseus was the data sharing platform for fraud. I say the first one. So it was about 15 years ago where we really we built for the airline community, because one of the things, and I think as Peny said, it's quite a complex industry, and we were approached by 10 airlines in Europe because they were getting hit by fraudsters one after the other. And typically this is what happens because it is high value. With e-tickets, it's easy to sell in high volumes very quickly. And they just have to change a little bit of each booking to fly under the radar. So having the ability to share that data with each other so that it doesn't, to protect the others in your community from being hit by the same fraudster is really, really valuable. I think we had one case where basically there was a guy that had been defrauding, and it's always organized crime. But because of the data sharing on Perseus, the guy was stuck in Iceland and had to leave by boat because none of the airlines would ticket him. So, sometimes it can be quite an interesting one.
Yeah, I think where fraudsters collude, I mean, the merchants need to collaborate to form a front against them, right? And so I think the second point here is, and we'll come to it in the next slide as well, that a process integration. So it's you have the scoring itself, but then also how to start and stop the process and make sure, for instance, that and I remember a case where an airline in Latin America had a hard-coded window of like 1.5 days between the original transaction and then the review process. And if the review process was not completed after 1.5 days, they would just release the payments for settlement, only find out that a large part of those payments that were overdue for review were actually fraudulent, and that caused them a lot of damages. So it's not a standalone process. It needs to be integrated end to end. On the vendor selection side, and Penny, you're a new entrant, or at least as a third-party service. You've been very active in this space for a long time, very successfully, obviously, for the eTravel group. But it's also a fragmented marketplace, right? There's so many different modules, and I think orchestration, what we know from payment orchestration, there's also such a thing, and we could see it in the next slide as well, about fraud orchestration, where you basically combine a lot of functionality modules into a single end-to-end working solution. Can I say it like that?
Yes, indeed. And if I combine what you mentioned earlier about how you integrate and how you actually execute on your ticketing processes, on your flows, but then also how the vendors and how the fraud prevention playing into it, again, the travel industry is unique. For an OTA, ticketing means liability creation. So when you issue a ticket, you have created a liability. Some cases you can void it, some cases you can refund it, some case if you regret it later on, in some cases you can do nothing about it. So it depends really what is your flight supplier and how it plays. So from the OTA perspective, but I would say also from the airline perspective, because that is also operational efficiency that it's triggered, it is really important all the decisions to be taken accurately and instantly before your ticket.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there is a lot of, how to say this, scenarios or reasons of why somebody would like post-ticketing, but if somebody could go accurately and take the decision before the ticketing, then that would be, I would say, the holy grail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the magic stick.
Yeah, yeah.
So for that to happen, now I'm moving a little bit on how we on the eTravel group have done it. You need to get the best of all the worlds, right? You need to have your own technology. You need to have also data insights. You need to enhance your data. You need to also access other technologies, test them, combine them, see how exactly, what are the experiments and what is the best way that you can orchestrate a number of solutions so that you are maximizing your result. And I must tell you, it's not the same in every case. Case could be the market, case could be the airline, case could be a specific segment of traffic. It could be a lot of things that segmenting this, situations where you follow different approaches from the vendor's perspective. Now, on the other hand, having all of your data through one fraud prevention provider is also very important. Because if you cherry pick as a merchant and you only give, I have heard in the industry that there are, fraud prevention companies only processing 5%, 10% of the traffic of different merchants, because that's the merchant storage, which is fine. But then, the models and depending what kind of technology these companies are using, they might enter into bias and they might enter, they don't have the whole population. They don't have the full picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the orchestration and how you use different tools is one thing, but how you also monetize the data and how you are actually spreading them so that you get the maximum out of whatever you use is also very important.
Yeah, because Penny, what for me is also important there is to have it as high up in the flow as possible so that you have an overarching view on multiple channels. Airlines obviously have a call center, they have a mobile app, they have a website, they have a airline airport ticket offers or city ticket offers. So you want to avoid, they have card transactions, they have alternative forms of payment. So you also want to avoid that people are just trying to find the weakest link and trying to go through a different channel.
Exactly.
And then go outside of the regular fraud screening, and therefore it's not picked up as being a repetitive attempt, for instance.
Exactly, and this is like an omni-channel approach, like making sure that you are definitely are being protected. It has happened, Paul. That is true. What you are saying, it has happened that in one of our cases, fortunately not for ETG, there were fraudsters that they did found a hole in the call center where, the fraud prevention was not, the strategy was not the same. So, same fraudsters trying to penetrate from a different channel.
Yeah.
So, but when you are a global OTA like us, right, the way that we manage to be able to have one of the best KPIs across all areas, like declines and fraud cost and so on, is that we had to experiment and test with different ways, and technology definitely is super important, but we should not underestimate the travel specific knowledge and the DNA, which allows you to take advantage of everything you know around the flight ticket, for example, and build the processes on the back, including reviews, including quality checks, including alerts that are very industry specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great angle into it. And I think I put it here under vendor selection as well, with committing to the airline industry, knowledge about, being involved in it. We'll come to the next slide. I'll have it a bit more detailed, so I'll park it for now. Maybe just to wrap this one up, and then we'll continue. Obviously, card schemes play a very important role in fraud management because of the just the sheer volume of cards being used, but also the protection that the card schemes offer to the cardholder in case something happens to their card, which they had not intended. But there's also a lot of other, and we won't go into detail today, but a lot of other regulations, if it's from the EU or PCI DSS or from IATA, that have impact on the process, and that will also mean that you have to have dedicated people looking after, let's say, the fraud screening, that understand all the aspects that play a role in the airline and the travel industry. It's not something, Peny, I think to wrap it up, this one, it's not something you do on the side as a let's say a fraud screening provider that does retail and digital. Oh, let's do some travel on the side, because you need to really have some substance behind it. I think that's for me is key.
Yes, I mean, definitely. All the topics that you mentioned need to be, the compliance is required in any solution, like, fraud prevention, payment solution, anything. What I want to comment on this topic is that the card scheme rules become more and more strict around this, but also update some rules that they were outdated, in terms of thresholds and so on. PSD2 and in general, strong customer authentication mandates are now start to, move outside of Europe too. In my view, it's going to take long time to adapt on this due to, the slow adaptation of the issuing banks and how its countries enforcing it. But even if we would, in theory, assume that every country in the globe has 3D and strong authentication and everything, even in that case, fraud prevention is very important and necessary, especially now with the AI rise, that we always need to think that the AI, it's not only on the good side, right? It's also on the bad side. So we are going to face more and more challenges going forward. So you really need to have a filter and a net that protects you no matter what, the same way you pay insurance, right, for your health.
Yeah. Okay, let's because the good thing is that I think we have already touched on many of the things that I put in this diagram that I created for this session. Maybe just to give a very high level introduction to it, because there's a lot of detail here and it's available online. You can download it and read it at your own convenience. But obviously it's an extension of the payment. On the top left hand side with the payment orchestration, where fraud and fraud orchestration is a part of, either separate or embedded, by the way. You have obviously the screening itself. That's typically the automated part that's comprises of very many different modules, but also factors and data elements that you all see on this overview. Typically, there's kind of a traffic light that says, okay, well, if it's green, amber, or yellow, wherever you, depending where you are, or red. So if it's green, it will continue to the next step in the process. If it's amber or yellow, it typically is then presented in a queue the case management system to reps that will then check based on additional information and do some cross-checking, etc., before either declining or releasing. And also obviously there's a lot of monitoring going on to see if like Peny said, the balance between on one side the conversion and on the other side the risk, if that's still in balance and meeting the targets that are set by the company. Peny also mentioned on the bottom right-hand side, really secure or some customer authentication plays an important role, especially here in Europe. By the way, Peny, one comment, and I won't go into too much detail, but still obviously in the BSP card, so where a card is inserted into the PNR and then passed on to the airline, where the airline is merchant of record, if that's a customer card, is still seen as mail order telephone, as MOTO, and currently not part of the regulations. It's exempted,
Exactly.
but for the time being. And what I think on a general note, regulators, and I understand it because it's very complex, they struggle with addressing all the specific use cases of the travel industry and the airline industry. And there's always a bit of leftovers there that need more time to be addressed. And then maybe,
but even in that case, Paul, where because we all know that according to the IATA regulation, the airlines are able to transfer the fraud cost through the ADM mechanism to the OTAs or the merchants. Even in that case, even if there is no cost on the fraud side from the airline perspective, because for the industry there are a lot of side effects into it. Apart from the operational costs and the ADM management, it's also the compromise with the acquirers and the schemes and their acquiring IDs. And I would say the bottom line is that you really don't want to have fraudsters in your ecosystem, right? No. And the more tight it becomes for the travel ecosystem, the better, for everyone it is. But on that, because I talked indeed a lot about the orchestration in the previous slide, what I want to say on this topic is that fraud orchestration doesn't work, in my view, like the payment orchestration. So on the payment orchestration, you are able to experiment with different payment providers, right? And then you might be building a solution where it is smart, and depending on how smart you make the solution, you are cost optimizing or you are approval, or you're optimizing the approval. On the fraud orchestration, it is much more complex. There are many more components. It's not about having two providers and orchestrating. That's the simple thing. Even if you would be passing all of your data, from both, it's simple. You say, you put this traffic here, you put this traffic there, but that's not the point. It's not the point of putting the high risk traffic somewhere and the low risk traffic somewhere else, because that works if you have the same level of decision accuracy. If you don't have the same level of decision accuracy, it doesn't work. And what it gets compromised, it's your sales and your fraud cost and your conversion. So as a fraud solution provider, there are three things that you are aiming to help your merchant. You need to increase the sales, right? But you cannot push too much 3D because 3D is a conversion killer in some territories, not everywhere. You cannot be 100% sure on everything. So you really need to have second and third level of review, but not too much, because you really want to be fast, like 10, 15 minutes SLAs on reviewing everything and actually being able to say, okay, 0.5% of my traffic, I need to get intel right here, right now. I don't want to wait for the booking dispute window and the chargeback to happen, right? And then you really need to have an orchestrated dispute management. And orchestrated, what does it mean, orchestrated? It means that it's not sitting somewhere there, standalone, doing their defense strategies and everything, and not being connected with the whole components. Again, speed is one of the most important elements on the performance of a fraud solution. And it's not speed of decision, it is speed of how decisions are being, how fast decisions are being updated.
Okay, so let's, we're always a bit ambitious when it comes to content versus time, so I have to really start moving on. So on top right-hand side, we see dispute management. So if we continue to dispute management, and this is a topic by itself, I mean, you can probably run a 4-hour workshop on that. But Livia, I would like to pull you in. Because I think actually Arrow, maybe historically, and we'll come to that in a minute, but has focused on credit risk, but is way more looking at the wider use of data across basically the value chain. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on if we look here at the data sources, what is typically put together, for by a merchant to fight, a chargeback.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, because when we started is really about mapping the payment transaction, right, from the time of the booking through to the time of the service delivery. And as we were doing that, we realized that we had a lot of data intelligence as a result. So what we have typically is everything that happens, so everything including rebookings, changes, cancellations, refunds and chargebacks, and all the way up until usage. And what you find is that, in the travel industry, everything is complex, right? I think we've kind of covered that today for sure. But typically, let's say for an airline, the data that they need to dispute a chargeback is typically stored across 4 to 6 different systems. At least this is the feedback I receive. And then the time it takes to go into each of those systems and find the data that is necessary to dispute a chargeback is quite challenging. It's quite manual. And you typically only have around 20 calendar days or maybe a little bit more to find all that data and send it back in order to dispute the chargeback. This typically means, and at our annual event last year, we did some roundtables on chargebacks. And what we found out was that both OTAs, travel agents and airlines, what they do is they set a minimum, okay, below this amount, we're not going to dispute it. Now, that can be quite a large amount that is lost as a result. What we were able to do, by having all that data in the one place, we've been able to target for merchants, these are the ones that you should actually dispute. So we can actually see if a refund has already been done on that booking and someone's asking for a chargeback, it's a double dipping, right? Or some people call it friendly fraud. Depends on what the actual situation is. It could be that someone's saying, look, I want a chargeback because I didn't, the service wasn't delivered or I didn't fly it. We can see if that's actually already been flown or even partially flown. So we can really say, okay, you know what, you've got these thousands of transactions. These are the 10 that, this is, let's say, 100 transactions that that you could dispute, and these are the 10 that are actually still within the dispute window, and that you should actually investigate. Mm-hmm. On top of that, what we are doing is looking at partnerships with chargeback management companies, all the names that everyone probably knows, so that that transaction data can be pulled automatically. And populate the chargeback management case. So we don't do chargeback management. We really typically just look at the data. But these is trying to provide efficiencies to combat some of this stuff that just really costs. I mean, like ADMs, right? This type mm-hmm. of thing just costs the travel industry a lot of money unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it's a good moment, because you mentioned the data that can be used to fight chargebacks. I think you came across, and that's a nice segue into the next topic, credit risk, which is mainly around dealing with the risk of insolvencies, of bankruptcies of airlines that stop flying, or travel agencies that stop operating. An airline went out of business. Chargeback came in with the acquirer, one of your customers, but because of the systems on the airline side were shut down to bankruptcy, there was no direct access to that data, and because you already had the data, you could see which chargebacks came in for flights that were successfully flown, right? Were completed, and were still maybe just out of people trying to trick the system, trying to get a double dip it, right, and get basically a refund and the flight.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think one of the things is, of course, the trust in the data. So because what we do is it's an automated daily feed of data coming in from the airline or the travel agent, whichever merchant. The data is, let's say, it's neutral data, right? So we've mapped it all end to end. Our customer is actually able to take that data to court and say, we have data to say this customer flew, and therefore we are not on the hook for the chargeback. So not only did they not have to pay for chargebacks that they were not due to pay, we were actually able to stop them because we were actually monitoring all of this beforehand. So I think it's on both sides, actually, having that data in the same place, because chargebacks typically, those types of patterns can also be an indicator that something's not going well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Let's then jump to credit risk, and we'll continue with Livia. So actually next week there's a travel protection event summit in Brussels, organized by ECTA, the European Association of Travel Agencies and Tour Operators, and a full day program around all kinds of risk in the travel sector. And we will be there. I mean, Martin Alleman from Extra there will be there. I'll be there, and we'll be talking about the financial flows in the industry and the risk in there. And this goes also back to the origins of Extra.aero, when that Black Swan event, the pandemic in this case, happened. Pretty much all transactions were either all flights, all bookings were put on hold, were cancelled. There were pending refunds, there were chargebacks coming in. It was one big mess, but the result was a result of also a lack of transparency and understanding, of the flows. And so Livia, if you look at what Extra.aero is doing in using not only the data at the time of booking and ticketing, but also what happens after that, and the role they play in basically improving the relationship, the onboarding, but also the ongoing relationship between the airline, the on the travel agency, and the acquirer or the scheme, that the payment provider that they work with. Can you maybe just give a bit of background on how that works?
Yeah, definitely. So we were born out of the pandemic, and it was around it started because acquirers found themselves on the hook for all of these unflown vouchers, and not understanding, what were they actually liable for. Nobody could actually quantify that number. And coming out of a discussion of the top 3 airline acquirers, IATA, and the airlines, what we do now is to really give that visibility. I think there is a fundamental challenge in our industry that travel has always been seen as a risky industry, one. And second of all, people cannot understand how to calculate that risk. So what tends to happen is that you have a general over-collateralization in the industry because the service has been paid for, but nobody has visibility as to when that service has been used. And if they don't know that and they don't know how to calculate it, then assumptions are made. And what we've seen is that those assumptions mean that the calculation of, let's say, exposure versus true exposure, there's around a 10 to 25% difference. Now, you might hear some people say, 10%, I just take that into account, but 10% of several hundred million or billions of transactions is quite a lot of money. And you want to think that you want to have a handle on that, whether it as a payment provider or as a merchant. So what we do is we provide that transparency. It very much helps the merchant also, obviously, to optimize cash flow, make sure they're unlocking any cash that's being locked up. But also the trust and transparency means that on an ongoing basis, both sides have the same view of the same picture, if that makes sense. So it's not that the merchant, like the OTA or the airline, says, this is what my risk is. And then the acquirer, or let's say their issuer that they use that's providing them a credit line, says, well, no, but this is what we see. And this is how we're going to work with you as a result. In this way, there is an agreement as to how that risk looks. You've got the usage data as to when that exposure is over, and it enables the conversations to happen earlier as well. So when there are things, we use AI. If something comes up and there's an anomaly, that conversation can be constructive rather than and proactive rather than reactive.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, maybe before we jump to the next one, on my picture here, you'll see that it's B2B, but also B2many Bs actually. And the key thing here, and I'll leave it with that, because next week will be a full day of I think 10 different sessions to try to explain all of this, so we don't do it in 1 minute. But that there is a number of steps between the customer and the end supplier. There's a typically quite a long period, and also the money flows in a certain timeline, and also within a certain format, like if it's an account to account or a virtual card. And it also has these forms of payment, payouts, have different characteristics. It also contribute to the risk that one of these players is actually taking on, the liabilities, and also their payment providers. On the other side, and that's what happened during the pandemic, if all of a sudden a mass number of payments needs to be refunded now, especially in the US and also in Europe, regulators say no, it needs to be returned within 7 or 14 days. Well, try to go to that local tour guide in South Africa that's doing that, that tour, and try to make sure that everything is in sync, right? So that's pretty much in a nutshell what the event next week is about. And with the European regulators around the package travel directive and the local consumer protection schemes and acquirers, so it's going to be an interesting day next week. And Livia, you already mentioned, and I have two. One of them is for airlines, because the business models are obviously different, where for an airline, obviously it's a direct, if they are the merchant of record, the payment is directly to them, and there's a direct liability with the payment provider. You explained that already, but maybe looking at the time, we can dig a little bit deeper into the OTA side, but I think that's with the diversity of, let's say, the number of suppliers, with ticket consolidators, with individual airlines, with hotels, etc. How on earth do you keep track of what's happening in that end-to-end process from a credit risk perspective? Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
This is for those people that know me, they know this is a topic very close to my heart. There are so many ways that people have tried to understand travel agent credit risk. Typically, travel agents that get accredited by IATA, there is an agency risk management process there, where they're looking at the risk of cash payments. There is insurance that looks at the credit risk of travel agents as well, but they're looking again very holistically, and they look at things like past financials. But it's really hard. Acquirers also, right? They look at past financials, and they might look at what are the transactions that they may have had in the last 2 years. But I think what that doesn't do, and especially when you have fast growing OTAs, typically, this tends to freak out a lot of payment providers and suppliers as well. Because suppliers, they also go, okay, do we want to let this travel intermediary sell on our behalf, because we don't actually know whether they, are they financially stable or not? And I think this is where there is a true misunderstanding, because as you said, for an airline, they are the final service provider. So it's a little bit easier, if you know how to read the data, to know if the service has actually been delivered. When it's an intermediary, there's the addition of, do we know whether that travel intermediary has fulfilled their obligation to pay the suppliers that they've just sold the service on behalf of? And the insolvency of Thomas Cook, for example, is a really good example of where they found that those monies had not been passed on. So giving that transparency is one. Knowing how that supplier has been paid is also really important, right? So knowing that they have been paid with something that actually protects the travel value chain, typically a virtual card, then that gives them additional it gives them additional reassurance that the travel agent has, in fact, not only paid, but they are protected in case the supplier goes under. Some of the other elements that I always encourage payment providers to do when they're speaking and trying to understand a travel intermediary's credit risk profile is the supplier mix, the diversity, obviously how they're paying those suppliers, the market mix also, and segment mix, because whatever they present with first, you may make one, let's say, conclusion around their credit risk profile, but that can also change over time. And one of the things that we see, and that what we have been able to do, is when we're tracking patterns, you can start to see, and you take into account seasonality and all of those things, not only does the pattern of transactions have an impact on credit risk profile, but also how it switches. So if you're an OTA that sells 25% of your volume on one airline, if something happens with that airline, clearly that's going to have a really big impact. So we have seen travel agents go under when an airline goes under. This is not unheard of. So, you know, it becomes also a way for travel intermediaries to articulate and show to their payment providers that, look, we actually know what we're doing. We know how to handle risk. We understand this is a risky business, and this is how we manage our payments, and this is how we make sure that we are not tied to, you know, any single supplier or market.
And Livia, I think that a bit story of my life, having to educate my credit risk team every quarter, every 2 quarters, every half year about, you know, how does this work and what are, you know, the situations that happen in the industry. It is if you're not completely into the industry, it's very difficult to understand all the mechanics of it. And typically, credit risk people do not necessarily go outside and speak to their community. And a little bit of a pitch here, but in April, ActuSera will organize the 3rd edition of their event. And one of the things is also to create more awareness around this topic and all the aspects that play a role in it. Can you say maybe a little bit about the event? What's the agenda, for instance?
Yeah, I can definitely. But actually, you made me think of one thing that maybe I should mention is when you talk about credit risk teams not really understanding the risk, and that, you know, yourself, you had to go and explain this to them a lot. This, I suppose, is where we really want to help solve that particular challenge in the industry, right? Which is the ability of travel merchants to find the right acquirers, and for acquirers, especially the commercial teams of the acquirers, to retain their customers, but also to grow their book, because we are always hearing, and we get a lot of these acquirers at our event saying, okay, we really want to break into the travel market. You know, we know that you guys have got a lot of experience. How can we understand more about it? Actually, having that type of visibility on an ongoing basis gives them the confidence to onboard, and so we can actually help speed up that onboarding and help grow their business, like kind of on both sides. So yeah, our event is really about that. So as much as we are, it's part of our DNA, the community aspect of what we do, coming from the Baseas group, and the objective of our event every year is it's an invite only for customer and partners, future customers, to come, airlines, travel intermediaries, any other travel merchants, acquirers that are interested or already very experienced in the travel space, and other deferred delivery merchants. And I think, and this year we're starting to also look a little bit into, you know, other deferred delivery verticals, because we've been asked so often. So we will also cover a little bit around that. But yes, we have a huge section of the event dedicated to the travel intermediary space, including package travel directive, including supplier payments. So yeah, we're really looking forward to it.
Okay. So, okay, thank you, Livia. Looking at the clock, we have only 5 minutes left, and James, I don't know if there's any questions. I can't see them, but we have one item left, and it's a special one, Peny, because a bit out of coincidence, you had a press release last week together with Finmont, who was sponsoring this webinar series. So can you maybe tell a little bit about your partnership with Finmont?
Yes, for sure. I mean, if I had to put you know, one sentence into it, is that we share the same DNA. We are both born from travel for travel. Finmont is definitely you know, focused on travel, and so are we. We learned from our own mistakes or growth plans, that we had to develop solutions, and we had to develop ways in order to expand and go to new territories and address this whole sophistication. And when we look into it, when we looked into our solution, we saw that there is something really valuable which made us productize it and make it available to the travel ecosystem. And that's how the Finmont partnership also occurred, because we both want to enable growth for travel merchants. We both want to create value, to solve problems, to be able to address any challenge in the expansion plans that airlines, OTAs, anyone in the travel industry has. And being general, it's not always, taking a general approach when it comes to solutions. It's not always the most effective way. So being specialist and coming from an angle that we've been there, we've done that, and that has been done in an extra large scale, like billions of euro volume and so many territories and so many learnings, right? Because we had to learn the hard way. that is for granted. Now we are in a position that we can partner with companies like Finmont and be able to make a very strong statement about helping the travel ecosystem. So I'm looking forward to grow this partnership and bring real value to our customers.
Okay, well, thank you, Peny, for that. And for me, it's another sign of travel fintech, where travel technology and financial technology comes together, and the value chain is being squeezed there, and solutions are created that will help the industry further. So with that, I think we're pretty much out of time. I don't think we have any questions. I think you've been very clear all the way. We tried to squeeze a lot of content into 1 hour, and there's much more to talk about, but maybe for another time. So thank you very much, Peny. Thank you very much, Livia, for joining. And we can skip this one. So maybe the last piece is a quick look ahead at the last session, number 8 out of the first round. It's about B2B payments. Just returned from the Airline Travel Payment Summit B2B. There's also a lot of things to talk about there. So I'm going to prepare, the next couple of weeks an agenda, and then shortly we'll send out the invitations, to join us. Most likely sometime probably mid-April, or between mid-March and mid-April. But a lot of ground to cover there as well. And with that, again, thank you for listening. And again, the other sessions are also available on the YouTube channel. And see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.